take this off to speak?
I think, yeah, Mike's.
Can everybody please take your seats? For those who don't know me, I am the first vice president of our museum. Elaine Bernstein. I guess you all know me then. I would like to welcome all of you to our museum event this evening. I'm so happy to be able to greet all of you. Before I introduce our guest speaker for this evening, I'd like you all to know that after Kim speaks, we're releasing the disc with the collection of stories put together by the Vietnam Veterans Committee for the sale to benefit the museum, which Bob Jacobs will introduce. We are very lucky tonight to have with us Kimberly Guise. How do I pronounce it? It is Guise, right? Kimberly Guise from the National World War II Museum. Kimberly Guise is a senior curator and director for curatorial services at the National World War II Museum. She holds a BA in German and Judaic Studies from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She also studied at the Universität Freiburg in Germany and holds a master's in library and information sciences from Louisiana State University. Kim is fluent in German, reads Yiddish, and specializes in the American prisoner of war experience of World War II. After working at the National Yiddish Book Center in Amherst, Massachusetts, she began working at the National World War II Museum in 2008, where she has since facilitated the acquisition of thousands of artifacts, led numerous museum tours, and curated several exhibits, including guests of the Third Reich, American POWs in Europe. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kim.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Guise, Senior Curator and Director for Curatorial Affairs. We like the long titles at the National World War II Museum. I'm also happy to have a few other museum colleagues here with me, and so they're over there running the PowerPoint. We have Colin Makinson, who is our Assistant Director for Education for Curriculum. And also we have Lou Schumann, who's a member of the Jewish War Veterans of America and longtime museum volunteer. Lou enlisted in the Army at age 18 in 1968. So he's one of over 35 World War II museum volunteers who are veterans of the Vietnam War era. When I first started at the museum 13 years ago, we had dozens of World War II veteran volunteers still working in all different capacities, restoration work, cataloging, leading tours, and even answering the phones. And we still have a few, actually. The gentleman that you see in the center of the photograph is Robert Wolf, Bob Wolf. And he is a veteran, World War II veteran volunteer, and he's hoping to come back after the worst of the pandemic. So we hope we have him back with us. But now we just have a handful, and they've largely been able to not work with us during the pandemic. But our Vietnam era volunteers like Lou are the literal next generation of museum volunteers, often born to World War II veterans, and they're the torchbearers of the service and sometimes the combat experience for those World War II veterans. Veteran volunteers of all eras, not just World War II veterans, make the World War II Museum what it is, a welcoming, meaningful space for our visitors. They embody the service and sacrifice that's at the heart of the museum's mission. There's a continuity and connectivity of service there. Several volunteers, I think including Lou, have told me that it's volunteering at the museum allows them to stay connected with other veterans of all branches, regardless of where, when, or how long they served. So if you visit the museum, you'll likely connect with other veterans like yourselves. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans opened in 2000 as the D-Day Museum. And here you see an image of what was our original building. Actually, this is kind of an expansion of the original building, but that's what we looked like for the first several years. And actually, for a while, when I started in 2008, this was pretty much our campus. It looks very different now. In 2000, I said we were the D-Day, we opened as the National D-Day Museum, and in 2004, the museum received the congressional designation as the nation's World War II museum, as the National World War II Museum. We had already, at that time, we had already opened our D-Days in the Pacific exhibit, and we had big plans already for the expansion, and that's still going. I'll talk about what we're working on now. And our mission is to tell the story of the American experience in the war that changed the world, why it was fought, how it was won, and what it means today, so that all generations will understand the price of freedom and be inspired by what they learn. And most staff members can recite that mission statement. We really, try to embody that and work on that mission every day. Honoring the museum founder, Stephen Ambrose, and that's the gentleman on the left. He's the museum founder. The museum's collections draw heavily from personal accounts, autobiographical materials, and oral histories to accomplish our mission. Dr. Ambrose was based at the University of New Orleans at the time, and so people ask often, why is the National Museum in New Orleans? And that's a very big part of the story, is Dr. Ambrose and his work on the Higgins boats, the LCVPs, the amphibious landing craft that brought U.S. soldiers to shore in every major amphibious assault of World War II. So Andrew Jackson Higgins, the guy on the right, and the 30,000 Louisiana workers under him at Higgins Industries, they designed, built, and tested around 20,000 Higgins boats here in southwestern Louisiana during the war. So the museum has just we celebrated our 20th birthday. It was a little different than we had planned. Our 20th birthday was on June 6, 2020. So we were in quarantine then, right? The museum was open, but we weren't allowed to have a big celebration. But we did a lot of online programming, and I'll talk about that too. Since 2000, we've expanded to a campus of more than 6 buildings. We have a campus. And this is kind of what you see when you go to the museum now. This is obviously a rendering of the campus, but we have a hotel of our own, the Higgins Hotel and Conference Center. We have a restoration building, and we're still working on completing our expansion. The buildings contain many immersive exhibits with artifacts large and small. And with those, you can see this is the U.S. Freedom Pavilion, the Boeing Center. So this was a building that was largely sponsored by Boeing. And it contains, guess what, aircraft. We have 6 warbirds in this building, 7 if you count a B-24 nose that's on the ground. So this is just one of the buildings on campus that you can visit. And with these immersive exhibits, we hope to allow visitors a window into the past. And to do that, we house a collection of more than 250,000 objects, everything from a B-17 bomber to ration tokens and tiny draft capsules and buttons, all kinds of small material. This is an exhibit that's in our Arsenal of Democracy building, the image that you see up on the screen. In the Arsenal of Democracy, we talk about the American home front during the war. So we have a factory floor, we have an American kitchen, and we also have an exhibit devoted to Japanese American incarceration here in the US during the war. So that's what you see there. In our Campaigns of Courage building, this is the Road to Tokyo gallery and the Battle of the Bulge exhibit. So it's a snowy landscape there. In addition, we have a STEM gallery where we have programming for students. We haven't seen a great number of students back yet, but schools are starting now, so we'll see how that shakes out. But this is our STEM pavilion where we talk about science and technology in World War II. And I mentioned our warbirds. This is our B-17, My Gal Sal, that hangs in the Boeing Center. I'll talk a bit about some B-17 crewmen later on in my talk. So I mentioned 250,000 objects in the museum's collection. We also, so these are some of the different pieces that we have. This is an image of our vault and our collection manager, some of the dress uniforms that we have in the collection. And we also have a large collection of archival materials. So what you see here is just a few examples of uniquely World War II material, V-mail, these tiny micro photographed letters. So we preserve a rich archive of paper material, photos, documents, letters, scrapbooks, diaries. The collection grows every single day, and that's a big part of what I do. And Lou can attest to this because as one of the volunteers who works the front desk, every single day we're approached by visitors who have brought a shopping bag full of material with them to the museum or who call with questions about wanting to donate artifacts. So that's a large part of what I do at the museum as a curator, is respond to, assess, and facilitate the donation of artifacts to the collection. We thought there was a period when donations would trickle off, would shrink with the number of World War II veterans, but the offers have increased as the grown children of World War II retire, begin to have time to go through the estates of their parents and think about what's going to happen to this material when I'm gone. So we actually have had a large uptick in donations, and I can say that that COVID has exacerbated that or sped it up as people have had time at home and going through material. So we've actually had more offers for material during the pandemic. In the last several years, the museum has launched an entity called the Institute for the Study of War and Democracy. I told you we like the long names, right? And that's a public history institute dedicated to World War II research, programs, and publications. And we also have set up our World War II Media and Education Center, and that's designed to provide online access to museum programs and products. Both of these entities, as well as my department, Collections and Exhibits, are crucial in our partnership with Arizona State University. We have an online master's program in World War II studies. It's the first of its kind. It's just devoted to World War II. And we just graduated our first cohort of students last year. As part of that program, we also offered non-credit courses for lifelong learners. And the second run of my course, the course that I teach, it's called Captured American POWs in World War II. That's launching next week. So if anyone's interested, I can provide you information about that course. We also opened a research library. This is an image of our library. It's still in the early phases of cataloging and acquisition. And this is a center for personal narratives, for memoirs, and other important primary and reference sources for researchers, including family historians and genealogists, to use as tools to learn more about all aspects of World War II. We're still expanding physically, and beginning next year, we'll open another new building. So this is a rendering of what that building is shaping up to look like. It's called the Liberation Pavilion, and it's described as the museum's capstone experience. It's being designed to showcase the final chapters of the war and the immediate post-war years. So that this building will contain lots of different exhibits. It will contain, importantly, the museum's first permanent space devoted to the Holocaust. It will also contain exhibits on the cost of war and stories of American troops who were held as prisoners of war and those missing in action and killed in action. We'll showcase the post-war war crimes trials in both the Pacific and in Europe, as well as the world, what the world grappled with, the ideas of what justice might look like for the perpetrators of war crimes and of crimes against humanity. We'll look at adjustments made as those who fought returned home to a post-war world and the challenges that many veterans faced as they returned home to a country in which they did not have full rights as citizens, even as veterans. So it will be a very heavy gallery, I anticipate. There are a lot of big subjects there. We'll also have a reflective space in that building, an interfaith chapel, and exhibits that center on faith in wartime, on the home front and on the battlefront. We'll talk about chaplaincy and the story of the 4 immortal chaplains. So these are just a few of the many enormous topics that will be covered in this one building. All of these topics deserve a presence on our campus. At the moment, roughly 5% of the museum's holdings are on display. Of course, we hope to rotate material on and off display. We're expanding. We also have a lot of educational offerings, digitization, and online use. So during the pandemic, we saw a 200% growth in online content for the first few months of the pandemic. We published at least one new piece of content, either an article or a webinar, every single day. And we're pretty much operating on that model. And as someone who has contributed to that effort, it's been pretty exhausting, but it's also very rewarding to see the amount of content that we've been able to amass in such a short time, in a year, basically. In large part, we're still working on that momentum, and now we're gearing up for the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor this December. So next month, we're going to launch 80 Days to 80. So if you keep an eye on our website, you'll see, starting, I think, September 15th, we'll be publishing a new piece of content related to Pearl Harbor every single day leading up to the anniversary. So digitization of our collection is a top priority, and we have a digitization team. These are some of the tools they use. We have a book scanner. You can see in that slide we have a scrapbook laying on our book scanner, and then you can see an image of our archives. It's a top priority for the museum. We also have been digitizing oral histories. So last year we digitized 650 oral histories, and we're going to do that again this year and publish those on our website. And we also have goals of digitizing 5,000 multi-page documents like letters, 4,000 photographs, and 100 bound volumes like this scrapbook and diaries. So the museum's focus has always been personal. We've collected thousands of interviews with those who lived through the war, not just those who served, but those who experienced the war in many different ways. And we're still interviewing people. We've started experimenting with Zoom interviews, which the results are mixed, but it's any way to get the stories down. The goal is to publish most of our collection online on our digital collections website. So that's what you see here. We're about to revamp the site, so hopefully it will look a little better soon and the search will be better. In addition to our permanent exhibits that I talked about and showed you some photos of, we also mount temporary exhibitions at the museum, usually 2 a year. And some of those are created in-house using our collection, and others are brought in from partner institutions. And currently, this says July 25th, but it's been extended. Currently, we have Dimensions in Testimony Liberator Alan Moskin. Some of you may know Mr. Moskin. He is a fantastic individual, so we're excited to have this exhibit here. It's at the museum through September 11th, and it's kind of a hybrid of something we've created ourselves, and we've also worked with the Shoah Foundation at University of Southern California. So it's a tandem display. It is the product of 5 days of interviews with Alan Moskin by the Shoah Foundation. Their interviewers asked him over 1,000 questions, and over the period of 5 days. So really interesting process in itself. He said he had to wear the same outfit every day because he had to look like he was wearing the same thing in these interviews. But the Shoah Foundation used these responses that he gave to these questions to create what they call an interactive biography, where visitors can have a conversation with Alan. So using artificial intelligence and computational learning, visitors receive responses to questions that they pose to the system. They call it a system. So here you can see a family asking some questions. You step up to a podium and ask a question and receive a response. So the Shoah Foundation has several of these interactive biographies running across the country, focused largely on survivor testimony. I first had the opportunity to view Dimensions in Testimony during a visit to the Museum of Jewish Heritage in 2018, where Pinchas Gutmann's testimony was installed. And I was familiar with the project already and fascinated by what it meant for testimony in general, the idea of testimony, and how technology could be used to extend the life and testimony of survivors and of witnesses. So it's a very interesting, important project. The installation at the World War II Museum with Alan Moskin is the first time that a Camp Liberator story has been featured. And the museum is the premier site of Alan Moskin's exhibit. So it's still in beta testing, what they call beta testing. It's not officially launched. Since it's the first time it's appeared, the interactions that are undertaken at the museum will be used to train this program to respond to visitors' questions in a more accurate way. So when we opened the exhibit with Alan, the Shoah Foundation estimated that accuracy to the responses was about 65%. So I'm not sure exactly how much it's improved, but we've been asking him a lot of questions. Visitors can ask Alan about so many things: his favorite color, his favorite foods, and they do ask him these kinds of things. But you can learn about his early life. He was born May 30th, 1926, which is pretty late for a World War II veteran. He grew up in Englewood, New Jersey, and when he turned 18, was drafted into the Army. He was assigned to the 66th Infantry Regiment of the 71st Infantry Division. There you can see a little young baby Alan Moskin. The 71st Infantry Division arrived in Le Havre, France on February 6, 1945, and then they fought their way through the Rhineland, and in April 1945 took the German cities of Coburg and Regensburg. But it was in May that the unit really had their one of their most defining and tragic moments, and that was when they arrived at the site of Gunskirchen concentration camp, a subcamp of Mauthausen in Lambach, Austria. And survivors met them on the roads. They didn't even get inside. Survivors met them on the road, streaming out of the camp looking for refuge and food. And there were about 15,000, Gunskirchen was the site of, there were about 15,000 Hungarian Jews that were still in the camp that had been abandoned days prior. And it was shocking to Moskin and the other American soldiers. Although much was known about the camps, of course, at this point, Moskin and many of the soldiers on the ground, including Moskin, had no idea what they were about to encounter. And he talks about that in his testimony. And they were helpless to aid the individuals. Mr. Moskin described how he tried to communicate with survivors, telling them, "Ich bin auch ein Jude." He said he didn't even know how he reached back in and kind of grabbed that phrase. He didn't even know how he remembered to say that. He never recalled having learned that phrase. And he locked away these memories for 50 years. He didn't start talking about his experiences at Gunskirchen or even his service overall until 1995. And then it was kind of reluctantly, even, he had to be asked a few times. But he began speaking to school groups and about his experience as an American Jewish soldier and concentration camp liberator. In May, I conducted a webinar with Alan Moskin. It was a pretty surreal thing to talk with a veteran about visitors talking to a virtual version of himself. You can see that program online. Mr. Moskin was one of 500,000 American Jews who served in World War II, and the American Jewish service story in Europe was a very personal one that came with enhanced passion and extra motivation and extra risk. Some foreign-born service members had this increased personal motivation to join the fight, having fled persecution in their native lands. You can see this is a naturalization paperwork from the museum's collection from a soldier named Harry Oppenheimer, Heinz Oppenheimer. He was born in Hamburg in 1920. He emigrated to the U.S. in 1937 and served with the 86th Infantry Division. He was naturalized, if you go to the next slide, Colin, at Camp Fannin in Texas. So that was, naturalization ceremonies were happening all across the U.S. in camps, and even overseas. They happened overseas. So soldiers like Harry Oppenheimer were driven somewhat by revenge to return to their countries, their births, in American uniforms to fight for democracy and against fascism. Foreign-born troops made a significant contribution to American victory in World War II, and over 300,000 foreign-born individuals served in the Army in World War II. In 1940, nearly 1 in every 11 individuals residing in the United States were born outside of the country. And 15% of naturalized citizens from Germany and Austria served in the armed forces, so around 16,000 individuals, so like Heinz. And male non-citizens had to register for the draft like their citizen counterparts. If they entered into service either by the draft or enlistment, they didn't automatically receive citizenship, nor were they required to naturalize. But military service during World War II was somewhat of a fast track to citizenship. It was also, for some, a way to belong. Just recently, I heard from the daughter of this gentleman, deceased veteran Clayton Bernard Burrs, who grew up in the Hebrew Orphans Asylum in New York. And she said, as a Jewish boy, he had experienced a great deal of discrimination early in his life, which left him feeling less than worthy of belonging in the country. He joined the Army prior to Pearl Harbor and was wounded in action with the 490th Infantry Regiment on November 28, 1944, in France. In a letter home to his wife and young son, First Lieutenant Burst tells of his receiving the Purple Heart. I opened the box, looked at the heart with tears in my eyes. There I could see the blood I had given to make sure that you and Dennis would never be subjected to the atrocities committed by the Germans. Now I have a right to say I am a citizen of the United States, and my family is a family of free people, free to come and go as they please, free to speak, to worship, to think. Some American Jews experienced discrimination, of course, anti-Semitism from their commanders, from their own ranks, who may have even blamed them for the present fight. Others experienced great acts of solidarity, of unity, and of kindness. And fighting in Europe, American Jews faced real danger with physical repercussions should one be captured. They also may have fought emotional battles. These included the fear of being captured, fear for one's safety and for one's family, even for one's extended family who may have been victims of Nazi persecution. Around 9,000 American Jews ended up as POWs in German captivity. And generally, this is a telegram from Harold Rahm, who was from Philadelphia. And he was one of what they referred to sometimes as guest of the Third Reich, a POW in Europe. So generally, they were afforded the protections of the Geneva Conventions. American POWs were overall, and were not treated differently than their non-Jewish fellow American POWs. But the threat of separation, of persecution, was always present. Prior to capture, some American soldiers and airmen were keenly aware of the potential dangers that they faced as Jews. One cause of concern was the possibility of being identified as Jewish and being singled out by the enemy. A point that was discussed by some was whether or not to keep one's dog tags. And here you see an example of some dog tags from the museum's collection, and actually from the volunteer Robert Wolf, that you saw in that first image. These are his dog tags from World War II, with a tiny little mezuzah on the attached. And these were initially miscatalogued by someone at the museum as it said a small whistle. Like, wait a minute, that's not a whistle. So I've corrected that in our database. But you can see in the corner of Bob's dog tags, there's a little H, and that's H for Hebrew. So during World War II, dog tags indicated religion, with a C for Catholic, P for Protestant, or H for Hebrew. It was changed to a J in 1952. Some Jewish servicemen debated whether to declare themselves as Jews for this purpose, or whether or not to use a C or a P. The H on your dog tag could make you a target, but not having a dog tag at all was also really problematic. Should you be accused of being a spy, it was what identified you as an American serviceman. Some airmen flying missions to bomb Nazi Germany ditched their dog tags when they were shot down. Others decided to leave their dog tags on base when they flew, and there were some reports of people having a set of flying tags that were blank, that didn't indicate religion. But some made the conscious decision to defiantly and proudly label themselves as Jews. If they were to be captured, they wanted the enemy to know, they wanted the Germans to know that these were American Jews who were involved in the bombing of German cities. It was interesting, I had the opportunity to ask Alan Moskin about this, and he said that once they got into German territory and the threat of capture was there, he said their commander said there were 2 Jews in the company, and their commander asked, would you like me to hold on to your dog tags? And they both decided, no, we'll keep them. But that was something that he offered to do for them. Lieutenant Irwin Stavrov, does anybody remember Mr. Stavrov? Let's see, no? Lieutenant Stavrov, who was a bombardier with the 8th Air Force, he was shot down on his 35th mission days after his 22nd birthday, he recalled throwing away his dog tags before being taken into German captivity. He soon discovered that this precautionary action was unnecessary because the German interrogator who questioned him had for a time lived in Buffalo, New York. He was actually Stavrov's parents' paperboy for a while. So the connections were that close. They knew everything about him. Here are some items from his collection. I met Mr. Stavrov in 2012 when I curated an exhibit, the exhibit Guest of the Third Reich. He ran an organization called Pets for Vets out of Florida, and he trained service dogs. So that's Mr. Stavrov with one of his dogs, Cash. And then that's at the museum. This also, Swank, I don't know if you can see it, but Swank is, of course, a play on Yank magazine, but Swank is from Temple Beth Zion, from Stavrov's community, and that's him on the bottom right. And then in the center, you see Mr. Stavrov's German POW ID card. And it's interesting because that also lists him as a Jew, but there's a little question mark after it. It says Jude with a question mark. So I'm not sure exactly what that means, because they knew very well that he was Jewish. Interrogation in general was a big source of concern for American Jewish POWs. It was a time where you could be alone with your interrogator, and that was really threatening, really scary for anyone. But per the Geneva Convention, one was required and instructed to only give one's true name, rank, or service number. And the Germans recorded information on one's profession, one's parents, one's religion. They asked about religion and tried to determine whether you were Jewish. And like Stavrov, they often knew. But some admitted to being Jewish, suspecting that the Germans knew anyway, and others denied it. Those many who denied it later recalled with shame that they didn't admit to being Jewish. But these were pretty terrifying moments, and no POW wanted to be turned over to the SS or the Gestapo rather than being handled by the Wehrmacht troops who typically ran the Allied POW camps. After capture and this interrogation, most Jewish-American POWs were sent to Stalags and Oflags, along with all of the other American POWs. In the camp, being able to understand and communicate with German guards, as many Jewish-American POWs could, because they maybe knew a little Yiddish. They could understand some of the German and could communicate with the guards. Sometimes people hid that fact that they understood what was going on, and sometimes they used it to their advantage. So depending on where you were, it could be a benefit or a detriment. And it was risky if they knew, right, also. But there were cases reported, of course, in American POW camps or among American POWs where anti-Semitic American POWs harassed their fellow Americans, even going so far as to blame them for being there, for being in that situation. In a few rare instances, Germans segregated or made attempts to segregate Jewish American POWs, and this occurred at Stalag 9B in January 1945. There, the non-Jewish officers and fellow prisoners defied German orders to identify and thus doom the Jewish American men among them. Eventually, under duress, many Jews did self-identify there, and others were selected randomly and by name, appearance, or otherwise. Around 350 American POWs were selected then to be sent to the Burga slave labor camp upon suspicion of being Jewish, and they endured an inhumane treatment. It was a concentration camp, a subcamp of Buchenwald, and among those 350 American POWs, 86 of the men died before liberation. So interviews with Burga survivors can be viewed on the museum's digital collections website. Attempts were also made in Stalag Luft 1. This is an image of that camp. It was in the very north of Germany on the Baltic Sea. Attempts were made there to segregate Jewish POWs, and they were pulled from their barracks and placed in a separate compound. There was actually even kind of a selection where they were asked to identify, and they were sent to, the left for Jewish Americans, and the other, on the right were the non-Jews. And Irwin Stavrov underwent this experience, and he said the element of not knowing the next move that would be made placed a tremendous amount of pressure on all Jewish prisoners. Rumors circulated that they would be killed ahead of liberation. And there are a few interesting stories about what some of the people did at that moment when they were asked, brought before a guard and asked to identify themselves, and they were segregated. One man who had a big, long mustache that he had been growing during his captivity, he insisted, his name was Morgenstern, he insisted that the H stood for Hindu. And they said, okay. They actually sent him to the area with the non-Jewish POWs. But this was a very difficult time. But also, Mike pointed me to the story of a man named Mozart Kaufman, who recalled this period as really some of the first times he was with all other Jews. He had never really been part of a community, and that was a unique experience for him. So in the POW camp. In one rare instance, several American Jewish POWs were exchanged and sent back to American lines. Private First Class Bernard Rader was wounded and taken prisoner in October 1944, and while in a German hospital, he displayed a Catholic prayer card over his bed. We have that prayer card in the museum's collection. So he did this to, try to fool his captors, so they wouldn't suspect he was Jewish. But he was part of this rare battlefield exchange in the winter of 1944. And this exchange and Rader's return to American lines was reported on in the Morgen Freiheit newspaper. This was a little test of my Yiddish. Can I still read it? Can I do it? It's been a long time. But so this is one of the articles in the museum's collection about Bernard Rader and his captivity and his exchange. But with the exception of Berga and other such instances, American Jewish POWs were largely treated in the same manner as their non-Jewish fellow servicemen. The death rate in the European theater for American POWs was around 1%. So it was, if you made it into a POW camp, your chances of surviving that captivity were pretty good. Although this, this can be said of the other Western Jewish POWs, mainly French and British, the Soviet Jewish POWs were given absolutely no protection and had more than 60% death rate in POW camps, but also in concentration and death camps. Even still, being a Jewish American fighting in Europe was a frightening and unpredictable experience. Here are some of the items from the museum's collection that we have. A lot of these stories were drawn from some of the personal histories that we have, from some of the artifacts, and also from diaries. So the diary on the right was kept by Harold Rahm when he was in Stalag 3, I think. Stalag 3, yeah. These are just treasures that I am so honored to work with. Increasing the museum's representation of the American Jewish service story is a part of the museum's overall effort to broaden diversity throughout the museum, telling stories that reflect the full range of the American experience in the war. And I expect to continue my work on the topic as I work on an exhibit on women in the uniformed services in World War II, and that's going to appear in the museum in 2023. So I hope you've enjoyed this little overview of the museum, and I hope you're able to visit us while you're here. Please say hello, and I'm happy to take some questions if anyone has them. I don't believe we do. I had to look towards Lou Schumann because he knows the galleries just as well. No, I don't believe we do. But I will learn that story. Yeah.
Just a book written about it.
Okay.
Recently, Major General Maurice Rose. He was the son of a rabbi.
Okay.
A couple of good books on Maurice Rose, and also the very interesting controversy on whether he did consider himself Jewish or not.
Uh-huh. Thank you.
Here's another question.
Yeah.
Young lady, I was just curious, is there anything in your museum that deals with the merchant marines that, I was very curious, I had relatives that were.
Mm-hmm. We do have a gallery on merchant seamen, merchant service, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're welcome.
You didn't mention Ronnie Edmonds. How'd that come up?
I'm sorry?
Ronnie Edmonds,
No.
you know what I'm talking about?
No. Roddy Edmonds?
He was a master sergeant that was in charge of a POW camp, and he was told to, what do you call it, have his prisoners fall out.
Mm-hmm.
His son's a pastor, goes around and does presentations about it.
I learn like 25 new things every single day about World War II, and I'm so thankful, yeah. So I will we'll look at that, yeah. Yeah. Was that from Stalag 9B? Was it Stalag 9B? And where they were sent to Berga? I'll look, yeah. I thought I would get some stumpers here. I wasn't wrong. Yeah. Was there a use of dogs? Yes. By American troops, there were yeah. I mean, the Marine Corps used war dogs heavily in the Pacific, but dogs were used throughout. We did have a special exhibit a while back called Loyal Forces, Animals in World War II, in which we featured dogs, horses, mules, pigeons, mascots, cats and that kind of thing, exotic animals that people encountered in the Pacific. So we do have some information. We produced a book at that time called Loyal Forces. But, yeah. Uh-huh. 9? Uh-huh. Yeah. And so I think that was the group that ended up going to Berga. Yeah.
I did spend some time today at your museum, and it was incredible. I think the two new exhibits you have, or since I was last here, the Pacific and going to Tokyo and going to Berlin, they were incredible. I would recommend everybody in the room see that. My question is, I'm making the assumption, are you working actively with our museum in terms of sharing some of the collateral and assets that the Jewish Museum has and showing in your museum?
We are now. So yeah, this is, I don't, we have not borrowed anything as of yet, but yeah, I'm now in contact with Mike and look forward to working with your museum. Yeah, for sure.
General Rose, my wife's family's from Denver. He was George Patton's Patton called him his most effective field commander. So if he was Jewish or not, when he died, it still would be, he was the son of a cantor in Denver and a rabbi. It would be very, very impressive to have some type of material about him.
Yeah.
Because Patton specifically said, without General Rose, he may not have accomplished what he accomplished.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kim, for that wonderful presentation. And I must say, being from the Department of New York, and I'm sure everybody here from New York will agree, and hearing about Alan Moskin was very emotional. At this time, I'd like to introduce Past Department Commander Robert Jacobs, Chairman of the Vietnam Veterans Committee, for his presentation.
I guess I could take my mask off for this. Good. Now I can breathe. Good evening. Most of you know me, but for those who don't, I was just introduced. I'd like to just give you a little history of how this project all came about. Back when Roger Gove, of blessed memory, was the chairman of the Vietnam Veterans Committee, this goes back a while ago, those of you who remember him, we began discussing in the committee, do we want to make a special effort to preserve the memory of Jews who served during the Vietnam War? And it went back and forth for quite a while, and then Bob Picard became chairman, and at that time, the guy who's taking my picture right now, Jerry Alperstein, kind of pushed it, and as a committee, we finally said, yes, we want to do that. We want to put something together, whether it be a book or whatever, to preserve the memory of Jews who fought during Vietnam. And then, so I was a member, and I think I had become vice chairman, and then it went on, and Barry Schneider, another doctor, so you had Dr. Picard, you had Dr. Schneider, and then eventually I became, and the project went on, we started gathering the stories of Jews who served during the Vietnam War, mostly from within the organization at that time. And then it got to the point where, well, Dr. Schneider became national commander, and yours truly became the chairman of the committee. Now here I was, I didn't have a doctorate. I didn't have an MD, so I have a master's degree, so I guess I was Master Jacobs. No, really, come on, you're supposed to laugh, people. No? Okay, anyhow, so we pushed along, and Jerry Alperstein and I really got working on the project together, and we eventually expanded it out to going beyond just JWV and going to other veterans organizations to see if there were Jews who served who were members of the American Legion or the Vietnam Veterans of America, et cetera, but were not members of JWV, and we found them. And eventually, we managed to gather the stories of 90 Jews who served during that Vietnam period of time. It may not sound like a lot compared to World War II. There were probably somewhere about 30 or 40,000 Jews who served during Vietnam who claimed, who claimed to be Jewish. Some didn't. And there were 200, and I'm trying to remember, Jerry, it was 260 something or 240 some odd who were killed. It was somewhere in that neighborhood. And we only have the stories of 90, but it's representative. We have Army, we have Navy, we have Air Force, we have Marines, and we do have a Coastie in there. We do have one member of the Coast Guard who served in Vietnam as a riverboat commander during that time. And so finally, we brought the project to a conclusion last summer, and I want to get a copy of it out. I should have done it before, but what we created was a disc, looks like this. And on the cover of the disc, and it's also on the disc itself, it says Jewish-American military service during Vietnam, Jewish War Veterans of the United States of America, National Vietnam Veterans Committee, and it has the JWV symbol, of course, and to the left it has the National Defense Ribbon, which you got once you passed basic training until a certain time, regardless of your service, and then the Vietnam Service Ribbon. The National Defense Ribbon and Vietnam Service Ribbon, which you got regardless of your service. You might not have gotten any campaign ribbon if you were in the Navy or the Air Force. That was an Army and Marine thing. All right, and so we got the discs printed finally last summer, and we got them copyrighted or copywritten, and we had 200 of them produced, and tonight it is going to be my honor to present them to the museum. This was all done, by the way, at the expense of the Vietnam Veterans Committee. Not a penny of it was done with JWV money in the organization. And we are presenting to the museum. We're holding a few back for presentations on other things, but and they were going to be for sale. And Mike, may I say how much they're going for? All right, they're going to be sold for $20 a pop. And by the way, the very first one, which I already have in my briefcase, I have a check here. Oops, I had it here when I walked in a room. I have a check that I'm going to be giving Mike to the museum for the first $20. And Jerry Alperstein, who's been my partner in crime on getting this whole project done, also is buying a couple of them, and he'll be taking care of it. After that, Mike, you want to come up here and take charge of it, or how do you want to do this?